All right, coming up in today's video, the great debate might have been solved. Is renting better than buying, or is buying better than renting? Coming up in today's video, Mortgage Professionals Canada just dropped a report on this. Let's dive into it. Coming up next. Pow! All right, Michael James Zach here. And like I said, we're talking about owning versus renting, the big debate that goes on almost on a daily basis, especially as housing prices have continued to soar and rents are getting up there. You would think renting is more affordable, but we're going to jump in it because Mortgage Professional Canada has dropped a latest report, maybe solving the debate forever. Before I jump into it, guys, if you are new to the channel, I want you to please subscribe for more great content. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up. If you don't like, hit the thumbs down, but definitely leave a comment because feedback is great and encourage everyone to be part of the conversation. All right, so as I said, we're talking about renting versus owning, and the latest report from Mortgage Professionals Canada dropped talking about this and discussing obviously renting versus owning, and it's a comparison of the cost of owning versus renting throughout Canada. I'll leave the link in the description. Basically, the premise is in the last 2 decades, average houses throughout Canada have gone from 154,000 to over 500,000. Now that's per year about 6.2% increase. Wages on the same time have only gone up per year about 2.6%, where rent has climbed around the same as wages at 2.7%. So obviously affordability, when you look at the big picture, some of the big cities like Toronto, Vancouver, it looks unattainable, especially as the last couple of years we've really taken off with price. But this, at the end of the day, home ownership is still strong. People still want to go out and buy a piece of real estate. You would think that when you look at the numbers, it doesn't really make sense, because why would someone buy when essentially it's cheaper to rent? Even though rent's getting up there, especially like in our city, in Toronto here, it gets very expensive for even a 1-bedroom. So what this report's all about, they basically did 266 case studies of different locations and types of dwellings, and like I said, analyzed the cost of ownership versus renting, and they concluded that more so it is more affordable and makes way more sense to own, and we're going to dive into it. Now throughout the report, they jump into a bunch of different aspects of, because at the end of the day, you're going to look at, for face value, you're going to say, Mike, technically, it is cheaper to rent than to own because cost of ownership, especially in the major cities, is very expensive. Even though rents jumped up, it hasn't jumped up enough to make it more lucrative to be buying. That's face value when you look at it. But you got to remember, when you dissect the numbers, and what this report does is it does take in consideration that if you're paying down your property, technically that's an asset over time. If it gets paid off, your cost drops, and at some point it does become much cheaper. And this is what I've always talked to people about when it comes down, and why I got into real estate is, at the end of the day, in school they don't teach us about finance and all that, how to save money and all that. The problem is home ownership pretty much builds you a glorified savings account, because it essentially makes you have to put money away. Obviously it goes into your house, and equity over time builds up, your mortgage gets paid down, and at the end of the day, in 30 years, 25, whatever your amortization is, if you've been paying your bills and lived in the same property, even if the market hasn't climbed up, you at some point are sitting on a nest egg of 100% equity. And at some point at your retirement plan, if you're just going to essentially stop working and downsize, and then you have money to obviously live. But see, that's the good thing about real estate is, in theory, it does that for you. Where most people think, oh, I'm going to save money, I'm going to stay at home, but they don't put money away, or they rent and they think that they're going to have this extra money left over to put aside. But then I'll tell you right now, the new iPhone comes out, all of a sudden you're putting a down payment on it, your monthly bills go up in terms of your phone bill because there's different packages you need to get. And the problem is all these companies market to us, and then we got to get the brand new car, you got to get insurance for that, you need new shoes, new Jordans or something, new red bottoms. All this plays into our paychecks, that takes it from us, and at the end of the day we're left with probably a credit card bill that again adds to the monthly bills. So real estate as a whole, when you need to make that mortgage payment and it goes into the mortgage interest obviously and then your principal, at the end of the day it's a glorified savings account. And this is what this article is pretty much focusing on. And at the end of the day, when you look at it like this is it makes it way more affordable to be buying than to be renting. So when it came down for them analyzing renting versus owning, they made used some numbers and used averages obviously to calculate increases per year in costs of acquisition and all that, and put obviously as ownership, there's variables in there that are not going to be on the renting side, as like property taxes, repairs, home insurance, utilities, and on the renting side, they obviously put an increase of rent per year. Now, they also used interest rates, and they started at 3.25, and they went all the way up to 5.25. And then they did case scenarios where they had it locked in for 5 years and locked in for 10 years. Now, the longer you had it locked in, obviously at the better rate, made it way more sense to purchase. And as interest rates went up, obviously that percentage dropped. Initially it was in the high 90s, and it went to we'll say 60 something percent, 65 I think, or 66%. Still above the threshold of compared to renting. So this, like I said, these case studies that they're doing are really in depth. The report's really, really long. Like I said, if you are interested in this stuff, I'll hit the link below. You can definitely check it out. But very interesting stuff, because at the end of the day, they are calculating and using a bunch of variables in there, mainly averages of what happens in the last couple of years here. So it is a pretty accurate based on averages. Now, out of the 266 combinations, as we were discussing, face value in quarter two, 72 out of the 266, it is cheaper to rent than to own. That's off face value. But when you consider, like we were talking about the net, when you're talking about savings and your equity and your mortgage going back into the property, now when you consider that, it jumps to 202 out of 66, which is 76%. Big difference. Now, the cost of ownership on average throughout Canada is going to be $541 more than to rent, face value. But when you consider those savings coming back into your pocket over a long term, over a period of time, it becomes $441 back into, or $449 back into your pocket. So that's as Canada as a whole. Over time, obviously, there's increase in rent. If you're a renter, there's increase of ownership. It's something to consider. But on average, these case scenarios, they use percentages over time. There's, with repairs, utilities, those are pretty fixed on average what's happened in the last 10 years. Now, for home ownership, the biggest variable there is your interest rate. And the thing is, you can lock that in. So as I said, they had 3 scenarios with the interest, because the interest is a really big variable there, but at the same time, you can lock it in. So it's actually the most stable out of all the other ones that are consistently going up on a yearly basis. Now, scenario 1, they use 3.25%, and essentially, with all the expenses that were fixed and what they were calculating, 263 out of the 266 case studies, you basically as an owner saved over $12.95 per month in the long run. Now, and that was in a 10-year period. In a 5-year period, if it jumped up to 4.25%, only 243 out of 266 it was profitable for owning, which was $1,014 per month as an owner. In the third case, they jumped up to 5.25%, and basically only 217 out of 266 combinations were profitable for the owners. And it was savings of basically $726 per month when it worked out if you bought what you'd be saving per month. Now, fast forwarding in 25 years, basically if you kept on doing this and increases of rent and all that, but in 25 years your mortgage is paid off, your savings per month jumped up to $1,549 per month versus renting at over $4,400 and something per month. So right there, it just shows you that in the long run, no matter what, you're going to be profitable. You know, again, the good thing when you do own, when it comes down to retiring, it's a lot more easy because you're in control of your destiny in terms of it's easier to budget. When you're renting, you never know when you might be getting kicked out, if they're not renewing your lease, and at the end of the day, they're going to be selling. You got to keep looking. There's a lot of variables that they did not account for, moving and all that, and they're just fixating on rent continue to go up and you're in the same spot. So that alone, very frustrating and something to keep in mind when, you know, obviously if you're going to rent for the rest of your life. So important stuff. So when we're talking where Toronto falls in the average housing cost as of 2018 quarter two, you have Toronto area value average price is $735,000, which brings a total owner's cost to $3,832. Net owner's cost would be $2,493. Renter's cost for the same type of property is $2,644. So based on the total ownership cost, if you're going to own versus rent, you'd be paying $1,188 more. After you factor in the net of the mortgage being paid down, it's $151 net in your pocket per month. And there we have it. So at the end of the day, when you look at all the factors and you definitely factor in a mortgage payment and principal being paid down over time, this is where it makes total sense pretty much across the border in terms of provinces. So check out, guys, like I said, there's a lot of detail in this report. I'll put the link in the description. Like, comment, share. Make sure you subscribe for sure. And we'll catch you on the next one, guys. Take care.